About 9 years ago, I was flying back from a conference in New Orleans, and I had to change planes in Washington, D.C. at Dulles Airport. Now, I am a very nervous traveler. Give me a destination and a mode of transportation, and I can create a nightmare scenario. Strap me into a metal tube, catapult it to 35,000 feet, and hurl it through the atmosphere at 500 miles per hour, and I'm nearly catatonic. So that's the state that I was in as I waited in the small holding area in the bowels of Dulles Airport. Enter a man clearly of Middle Eastern descent who sat down next to me. This man, nicely dressed and groomed, placed his only carry-on, a knapsack, next to my bags and quickly rose and walked a short distance away to begin talking on his cell phone. Pretty innocuous behavior. But this was 2007, just 6 years after 9/11. We had all been cautioned that if we see something, say something. The woman's voice over the airport PA system reminded us to report any baggage or containers left unattended. Now, none of this man's behavior actually fit any of these warning situations, but I was nervous, which made me even more uncomfortable. But more importantly, I was uncomfortable because it made me so nervous. I was annoyed that I was clearly profiling this man based on his appearance and his not terribly unusual behavior. Lots of people put down bags and step a polite distance away, if we're lucky, to talk on a cell phone. Of course, I didn't take any steps to report this situation. After all, what did I see and what would I say? But I was aware of where this man sat on the plane, and I couldn't help but notice his cell phone usage as the plane prepared for takeoff. He was asked several times to finish his conversation and turn off his device. Thankfully, the flight from Dulles to Harrisburg is a short one, and no threatening situations occurred. But it was my brush with profiling, and I've never forgotten it. We are currently in a time when public discourse, if we can call it that, has turned hateful, where vitriol masquerades as plain speech, where politically correct language, what I would call in most cases common courtesy, is trampled by those who champion telling it like it is. I know many of my like-minded friends find this current atmosphere poisonous and frightening. We, American citizens, pride ourselves on being a melting pot society, an inclusive and diverse home of the free. But this is not the first, nor will it be the last time that people of faith, people of ethical behavior, have been called on to protect and promote the espoused values of our country. Our early roots included the Pilgrims who fled religious oppression, but had little interest in establishing communities in which individuals would be free to behave according to the dictates of their own consciences. The Puritans, by very virtue of their name, set out to purify the Church of England of all practices related to Roman Catholicism. Their city on the hill was dedicated to ensuring that everybody complied with their Puritan standards. H.L. Mencken captures the Puritan spirit as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. And this exclusion and discrimination continues through centuries. Time magazine online offers just a brief history of intolerance in America. Here are only a few examples. In 1654, Peter Stuyvesant, Director General of New Netherland, tried to have Jewish refugees expelled, claiming they would infect the colony. In 1732, founders of the Georgia colony, seen as a religious peaks higher. Some days it was hard to tell the difference. At any rate, my job was to help students develop, in my opinion, one of the most valuable skills they would need in life, the ability to communicate effectively and confidently with others. Part of the learning process involved not only speaking, but listening and offering both encouragement and constructive criticism. After each speech, several members were called on to give at least one positive comment, as well as one constructive criticism for improvement. Now, traditionally, the public classrooms are set up with the teacher as the sage on the stage, not the guide by the side. So I wasn't surprised that when called on for commentary, students turned to me, even though I was sitting in the back of the classroom, to deliver their comments. Because they could turn their backs to the speaker and filter their comments through me, I was concerned that the criticisms took on a harsh note. She did this or he didn't do that. So I established a rule that the evaluator had to look at the speaker, say the speaker's name, and then provide feedback with the pronouns you and I. I couldn't hear you, or you needed to look up more. The shift in tone was nothing short of remarkable. It is difficult, though certainly not impossible, to look someone in the eyes, to personalize them by saying their name, and still be deliberately harsh. And these kids weren't really trying to be mean in most cases. The criticism simply took on a sharper tone because the speaker was cut out of the communication. He or she was depersonalized, otherized. It is why social media, with its anonymity and the lack of personal contact, can turn so vicious, and why modern technological warfare is so devastating. The soldier who pulls the trigger or pushes the button may be hundreds or thousands of miles away from the destruction and collateral damage. Now there's a dehumanizing term. Of course, the roots and mechanisms of bigotry are more complex than the simple example in my public speaking class. At the root of bigotry is fear. Fear of change, fear for safety, real or imagined, and fear of losing something someone else has. In his book, The Bigot, Why Prejudice Exists, Eric Bronner explores the roots of prejudice, as well as examining how current bigotry camouflages itself behind traditions, religious instruction, or personal freedom. That is, the freedom for the bigot to discriminate. Bronner, who serves at Rutgers University Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights, writes in his book that the bigot directs his hatred against those who threaten or might threaten his privileges, his existential self-worth, by challenging the prevailing prejudices of the day. This is why bigots, when confronted with their prejudices, find ways to twist their arguments to continue to justify their discrimination. NPR recently aired a story on their program Here and Now about a controversy that has gripped the small town of Dudley, Massachusetts. At the center of this storm is 55 acres of old farmland that the local Muslim community wants to purchase for a cemetery. The number of plots is admittedly very large, and the Muslim tradition of green and immediate burial raised some legitimate safety concerns. Muslims try to bury their dead within the first 24 hours and without a casket or vault. Currently, these Muslims must travel 90 minutes one way to a cemetery in neighboring Connecticut. They wish to bury their dead in the state in which they are citizens and in closer proximity. One resident at the public meeting, which drew several hundred people, testified with the usual NIMBY argument. Put the cemetery in your own backyard, not mine. Other speakers insisted that their concerns had nothing to do with what religion was involved. They simply didn't want a cemetery nearby. But the arguments morphed into something more sinister after Khan Sadozai, the Islamic Society president, said their religious community would conform to any town requirements, that they bury their dead in caskets and vaults. Sadozai validated the citizens' concerns about high water tables, wetlands, and private wells for drinking water. Then the arguments began to turn. Another resident asked, why not bury your dead in a Christian cemetery? Why do you need your own cemetery if you're willing to violate jihadi law? Another resident asked, how soon before they propose a mosque, too? And yet another was concerned that he was going to have to listen to crazy music like the call to prayer. And another shouted, you say the ride to Enfield, Connecticut is too long? Well, the ride from Afghanistan for a dead soldier is about 14 hours. So, ... In spite of this opposition, Islamic President Sadozai has faith in the fairness of the culture in which he is a citizen. Asked if he is deterred by what he heard at the meeting, Sadozai said, no, I don't think so. We are ready to answer their concerns, and we hope the law will be on our side. But the legitimate, straightforward concerns that Sadezai is willing to address are not the real issues at all. David Borey, the author of the article, commented that while the residents initially insisted that their objections had nothing to do with religion, the pronouns they and their often substituted for the word Muslim. My simple speaking class experiment convinced me that the divisive power of us and them can be replaced with the connection of you and me. We need to remember that for someone else, each of us is the other in some way. It may be because of where we live, the ethnicity of our last name, our gender or sexual preference, skin color, or religion. One of the saddest examples of bigotry is when former friends or colleagues are suddenly made aware of the otherness of one seemingly known and liked for some time. I think of one instance when a woman who had been a friend of a couple was ostracized by the husband when he discovered she had been gay all along. The solidity of his bigotry was shaken to realize that he had not known she was one of the others. Really ought to be armbands or something. We frequently hear justifications from current bigots that they hide behind their interpretation of what the Christian founding fathers envisioned for this country. We have Washington's words of reassurance, tough though they are to read, to the Jewish congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. Washington was responding to a letter by Moses Sykes, president of the first Jewish community in Rhode Island, that this new nation gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. Washington was a religious pluralist who deplored sectarian bickering, saying, "Of all the animosities which have existed among mankind, those which are caused by differences of sentiments in religion appear to be the most inveterate and distressing and ought most to be deprecated." Washington's religion has been the subject of much speculation about just how Christian he was. In over 20 volumes of his letters, Washington never once mentions Christ, and he never received communion in an Anglican church. Obviously, historical context can be twisted and reimagined to support views that are antithetical to our true mission as a country. Most of the time, I feel powerless to combat the irrational otherness fostered by those with the loudest voices and the most visible platforms and the biggest hair. Did I say that out loud? So maybe we need to work where we have a more powerful locus of control, those closest to us. The Southern Poverty Law Center's online publication, Speak Up, Responding to Everyday Bigotry, has an impressive list of resources. The publication provides 37 links, I counted them, on situations in which you might encounter bigotry and how you can respond. They include instances like what to do in family gatherings, in work groups, with friends and neighbors, and even what to do about our own biases. Anne, Sarah, and others can attest to the power of wearing the hijab, is that how you say it? I looked up the pronunciation, and the hope involved in the meetings of the Sunbury Together group. Research indicates that the inclusive TV shows and movies and literature can help neutralize bigotry and foster empathy. Leonard Pitts cautions that the current controversy over the lineup of Snow White Oscar nominations tonight is not just some outcry of political correctness. Nor is it just good business, he says, though it is that. Rather, inclusion changes the society itself. It lessens fears, opens eyes, unsticks hearts, makes people better. What exclusion otherizes, he says, inclusion normalizes. I'd like to end with Oscar Hammerstein's lyrics to the song from South Pacific, the 1949 musical appearing close upon the end of World War II that tackles the issues of Asian-American interracial relationships. The song was widely criticized as too controversial and inappropriate for a Broadway musical, which went on to be a huge smash. Lieutenant Cable sings it about his relationship with the island girl Liat, and it applies as well to the biracial children of the French planter Emile de Bec, and whether our heroine, American nurse Nellie Forbush, can accept them. It goes like this. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you're 6 or 7 or 8. To hate all the people your relatives hate, you've got to be carefully taught.